going to talk to you guys about Austria today. I'm trying to think if I talked about it last time or not. I feel like I talked about Hungary last time. So I studied abroad in Austria, which is why I chose Austria, because in Hungary, like, there hasn't been a ton of arts activism from what I could find. Don't really know very much about that. And it was difficult for Austria as well, honestly, to find somebody, but I think that this will be interesting, so hopefully you guys find it interesting. Just a reminder again, Austria is located in the middle of Europe, and it's a pretty small country, about 9 million people. The biggest city, Vienna, is the capital, and it's in the east, right here. And about 2 million people live in Vienna. A lot of famous artists have come from Austria of all different styles of art. So there's a lot of musicians from Austria. Has anyone heard of Mozart? Or basically, yeah. So he was born in Salzburg and lived in Vienna. We have other examples as well, but of course that's music. But yeah, so Austria has produced a lot of different, composers, artists, music in that regard. But today I'm going to be talking to you about a guy named Friedensreich Hundertwasser, and he was an artist and architect, and he's mainly known for his architecture. He lived from 1928 to about 2001, and he lived all over the world. He was born in Vienna and lived in Vienna for a lot of his life, and then he moved to New Zealand, I think, at the end of his life. But he started off as an artist and then became an architect. But in order to understand Hundertwasser, we have to look at Austria's history. So in the beginning of the 1900s, or the 20th century, Austria was a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, with Hungary, the Habsburg Empire, and it had a lot of power. It was one of the great powers in Europe. It was the land empire in Europe, but it broke apart after World War I. Does anyone know how World War I started? Do you want to come up and say it, or should you don't have to if you don't want to, but you can.
It started when Archduke was murdered in Austria.
Awesome, thank you. Yep, Archduke Franz Ferdinand was murdered in Sarajevo, in Bosnia. What is current-day Bosnia, but it was a territory of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time. In Bosnia, the former Yugoslavia, is a very volatile region. It was, at least in the past, and recent past, unfortunately. But basically, during World War I, Austria lost a lot of territory. It went from being a pretty big empire to being a small country, similar with Hungary. It lost a lot of land. And the Habsburg Empire was a multi-ethnic empire. That meant it had a lot of different ethnicities in it. They had Bohemians and Hungarians and Austrians, so it's pretty interesting. But after World War I, during the interwar period, Austria had been on the wrong side, I guess. They were with the Triple Alliance with Germany, and that meant that they lost the war, which meant that they were very bankrupt and had, had to pay, they were kind of punished, I guess, by the Allies, just like Germany was. And this created an atmosphere of tension. And Austria actually had a fascist dictator for a while, Albert Dollfuss, and he was in Vienna. He was actually assassinated by German Nazis, or German-sponsored Austrian Nazis, because Austrian fascists were different than German fascists, the National Socialist Party. But in 1938, what happened was der Anschluss, which is the annexation of Austria, basically. The prime minister, the person leading Austria after Dollfuss, was more moderate, and he did not want Austria to join, the German Empire, but Germany basically was called in to help like Austrian fascists or Austrian Nazis, so that they would take over. And a lot of the Austrians were happy about it and celebrated being a part of the German Empire. So that was Der Anschluss in 1938. And then, of course, World War II started in 1939, and it was very destructive. In Austria, again, Austria found itself to be kind of on the wrong side. And Der Anschluss is a pretty controversial topic today because the Allies afterward said that Austria was the first victim. But if you look at the way that the Austrian people responded to Hitler's annexation, like going into the German Empire, they're actually really happy, and it seemed to be pretty voluntary. So it's a very controversial topic even today. And Hundertwasser was angry about the way Austrian society was handling this involvement, I guess, with the Nazis, because basically they were saying that they were a victim, but he didn't feel like that was the truth. So after World War II, just a quick history, there was occupation by the Allies, just like Germany was split up into 4 different zones, and Vienna, like Berlin, was split into 4 different zones. But in order to get out of that, basically, and to have independence, they declared neutrality in 1955, which was kind of in the middle, like early start of the Cold War. And so they were neutral, just like Switzerland, and they still are neutral, which meant that occupation stopped. And then in 1995, they became members of the EU. But these are all important facts to know, I guess, when talking about Hundertwasser in the context of his life, so, and his work. Okay, so again, he lived from 1928 to 2001. He lived in Vienna and then traveled all around the world. And he did all kinds of different art. He started out with paintings, which I'll show you in a minute, but then moved toward architecture, and his architecture is pretty famous in Central Europe. He was affected by the Nazi regime in very personal ways. So part of his maternal family were killed. And so he was angry that basically Austrian society was saying that they didn't really have a part of the war, or that they weren't like collaborating with the Nazis, even though in a lot of ways they were. So this is one of the reasons why he was felt like he should speak out. So he was trying to protest, I guess, just the typical, more drab style of art, I guess, in his opinion. So he rarely used straight lines. He wanted to use very organic lines in his painting, and he used a lot of color. So he's known for just having a lot of color and a lot of just curves and different types of these lines that aren't straight, in order to have a more organic feel through his paintings and his work. And then around the 1950s, he started focusing more on architecture, and he applied it to that. So he used a lot of color. He rarely used straight lines. He produced some really interesting buildings. He was really into nature, and so he started to kind of his activism was not only to kind of protest this geometric shape architecturally of the Bauhaus style, which I'll show you in a minute, but also to incorporate nature into ways of life and living. And so in his work, he has a lot of different green, natural greenery in his architecture. So his architectural style was also a reaction to Bauhaus, and Bauhaus is this gray, very geometric, very sterile style. It's simple. It's supposed to be very modern. Use a lot of concrete. Originated in Germany. Started really in the 1920s, but a lot of post-war architecture was of the Bauhaus style from Reconstruction from World War II. And as you can see, it's pretty monochromatic. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I mean, some people like it, so that's cool. But this was considered to be the modern style. So in his early work, Hundertwasser, here's one of his earlier paintings. I forget which year it was, but you can see there's really barely any straight lines, or if they are, they're not very great, I guess. Not very many of them. And you can tell he uses a lot of color. Gustav Klimt is another famous Austrian artist, and he used a lot of color as well. So as you can see, it's kind of landscape the paintings, drawings, pretty interesting, I guess. And he moved towards architecture after he was painting. So this is one of his more famous works. This is the Hundertwasser house in Vienna, which is a place I've been to, and I'll show you a couple of personal photos. I was there this summer, and it's a really cool place. He used a lot of like nature. As you can see, there's greenery, like trees on the top, trees kind of all around, and all kinds of colors. And so, yeah, here's me and my cousin. We took a day trip, but it was a really pretty day, and there's a lot of greenery, and you can tell there's not like a lot of straight lines. It looks pretty cool, and people actually live in this building. It's like an apartment place, and so I think it would be really cool to live there. I'm really happy. So has anyone heard of like the Ronald McDonald House, like foundation, like Ronald McDonald houses around the world in America? No? Yes? No? Okay, so it's part of, it's like the philanthropic arm of McDonald's. We have one in Winston-Salem as well, and this is relevant, don't worry. But this house is what the Ronald McDonald House is in Essen, Germany. And it was designed by Hundertwasser. The Ronald McDonald House is for families who have children who are sick in the hospital. And it's a place for them to stay that's low cost and nearby. So the one in Winston-Salem that I volunteered at for a while is very nice. But I feel like this one is pretty artsy. And as you can tell, again, there's a lot of greenery, and it's very colorful. Looks like to be a very happy place, and has this like McDonald's colors of red and yellow. So another example is the Hundertwasser Kirche, or the like church, the Hundertwasser Church that he designed. It's in Styria, which is in like southern Austria, kind of nearby. But as you can tell, again, a very non-traditional church, very different from like the Gothic or Baroque styles typical in Europe. And again, in another like a green area. Yes. And then this one I like a lot. I would love to go visit. It's in Abensburg, Germany. It's the Kuchelbauer Tower, or yeah, the Tor. As you can see, it is very colorful again, and the shapes are very different. Not very straight lines, very different from that Bauhaus style, the gray and the geometric shapes. It kind of looks very whimsical, out of like a fantasy world. And a lot of Hundertwasser's work was around the like German-speaking areas. So a lot of his work is in Austria, in a lot of rural parts of Austria, but also in Germany, in these places, because again, he was Austrian, and he did, I guess, get commissioned to do work around the world, but specifically most of his paintings or most of his work, I guess, architectural work, was in these German-speaking domains. But as you can see, it's just very different from that. And he used his art to advocate for, again, like a more colorful, cheerful lifestyle. Because like with the Hundertwasser house in Vienna, when I went there on the I guess description is to say that he wanted people to kind of have more of a whimsical way of life and not be so serious as well, which is why the colors are sticking out. But so what was his impact, I guess? Why was all this important? Well, for one, it was a reaction against that Bauhaus style. It had people thinking of different ways of using architecture instead of being so geometric and so sterile. And it was pretty organic, and started kind of like this organicist way of developing houses. It changed the use of nature in art. He really put the forefront on using greenery, using natural elements like trees and plants in art, like architecture, he was really the first person to do that. And again, just was encouraging organic methods so that it's not so straight lined or square housing. So Hundertwasser, again, died in 2000, so he's a pretty contemporary artist. Vienna has seen a lot of art and artists. So it's pretty interesting to check out its history, I guess. So yeah, I guess.